Greetings and welcome back once again. We are live. This is Amuna. Getting ready, getting ready, getting ready. It's early, so I could take this bright light in my eyes. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for all those who have just subscribed, who may be new to the channel, who may appreciate the information, who may not appreciate the information. Welcome to all of you. Thank you for joining us here at Solonomics. This is actually Lev Project editions of the Solonomics narrative. Now, I want to jump in it because I got something to do in a little bit, y'all, in a little bit. This one is called I Ain't No African. Okay. I forgot the whole title. That's why I'm pausing. I Ain't No African. Shame, secrecy. And after I went live, I thought about separation. So I might add that after. And slavery. There's so much I would like to talk about. But oftentimes I have learned in my broadcasting career, if that's what you want to call it, that when it's too many topics on the table, then things get lost in translation. And so that being said, you gotta have to like split it up so you can deal with one issue at a time. And I know this is not the usual time where I go live, but I'm gonna have to I'm gonna have to come back and talk about other things. But what came to my mind today was what came to my mind yesterday as we were having the discussion about talk about the indifference on both sides, talk about the beef on both sides or all sides, let's talk about the bad blood, right? Let's talk about that's Solonomics, so I can do that. Let's talk about the bad blood. Let's talk about the perceptions or the misperceptions, the stereotypes and the things that we the people buy into to paint the other party as whatever we want to be. So as I played the video, now I forgot his name, but I did put the link in the box. And he was like, you know, we're tired of y'all coming over here and not giving us any respect and this, that, and the third. We're to validate. One of the things in healing is that you have to validate the other person's experience to a certain degree. This is if you want to get to a healing space. If you only want to have your opinion aired and not want to validate someone else's opinion or their experience, then this causes and furthers this level of friction. And this is what I'm just observing, but this is what I'm hearing. I'm hearing narratives being spun and changed to validate someone's anger or indifference or resentment, but I'm not hearing the same extension given on the other side, which can further into this friction. We inherited a lot of what we're experiencing now. Right. And so in order to get to the root of it, we have to be willing to work through our own mess so that when we come to the public to a certain degree, we are not transferring our problems and making it the problem of the collective. I'm going to read a little bit from this voice, and then I have a little bit of greetings and welcome to those who just joined us. I have a little bit of, I got pushback on the Roots movie, but I'm going to use it anyway because I think it's excellent talking points. But I'm just going to play the audio so that they don't, jack me up and stuff. African voices of the transatlantic slave trade. Why does she keep showing us books? Because people did the work. That's why. It's already a lot of this work, like going back and a lot of it is done. Now we have to take the time to see what they did. These are people's life work that they take and say, here, I'm putting this piece on the puzzle on the table. But if we don't validate someone's experience, then we will come to the table misinformed. So African voices of the Atlantic slave trade beyond the silence and shame. This is why I named it Shame, Secrecy, and Slavery. I might throw silence in there too. This is by Anne C. Bailey. Anne C. Bailey grew up in Jamaica. So this is the perspective that she's coming from. And she realized that in her growing up, she didn't really hear many stories about what had happened. And so she was intrigued. And she ends up going to Ghana because she wanted, this is why it says Atlantic slave trade, African voices. She wants to hear from those who were left back on the continent, what was their experience. She wants to hear it from the horse's mouth. So in this contribution, what I think is an excellent contribution to the discussion is what did they feel about what happened? We have, because it's a crime scene, make no mistake. If it is voted as crimes against humanity, then we have to look at this situation as a crime scene. At first, I was going to name this video Your Side, My Side, and the Truth. But I ain't no African because of the roots clip but I'm gonna go there. So we have to look at this as a crime scene because that's exactly what it is. We have reports of the perps. We have reports, and there are many people who were affected in this crime scene. So NC Bailey decides that she's going to go back to the continent to try to piece some things together. Okay. I'm going to read a little bit about who she is, and then I'm going to come to some of the findings. There's so much. She says, while growing up in Jamaica, Nancy Bailey heard stories of her grandfather's intelligence and her grandmother's fiery temper, stories that resonated throughout her childhood. But when she decided to look further back, a wide, uncharted gap opened in her family's history. Knowing that her ancestors were probably slaves, yet without any coherent record of this heritage, Bailey found herself stranded in the prevailing silence. All that remained were fragments of stories and whispers of the past. That hurts, not knowing where you came from. This is one of the injury of not being able to connect. For centuries, the story of the Atlantic slave trade has been filtered through eyes and records of white Europeans. So not only is this a crime scene, you only have one person giving the information, okay? In this watershed book, she's a historian, Nancy Bailey focuses on memories of the trade from the African perspective. African chiefs and other elders in an area of southeastern Ghana, once famously called the Old Slave Coast, share stories that reveal that Africans were traders as well as victims of the slave trade. Now, like I said, this takes a level of emotional intelligence where you have to process certain levels of pain to be able to absorb this information, okay? Bailey argues that like victims of trauma, many African societies now experience a fragmented view of their past. So they're also having this loss of memory as well. Partially explains the blanket of silence and shame around the slave trade. Bailey's desire to understand this emotionally charged and complex history was initially met with resistance and dismay. Why are you talking about this, sister? Why are you going into the history, sister? Leave that alone, sister. Don't touch that. But then we want to keep saying it was bad. It was really bad. Okay? How? In what way are we willing to invest the energy into this? It says, as a comment by Chief Awusa of Ator Core reveals, it's an awful story. It's an awful story. Why do you want to bring this up now? The same exact, I remember when I first read that, the same exact narrative that is happening on the continent in some spaces is happening here, is happening in the Caribbean. It's happening in South America. That was a long time ago. We need to get over it. Why are you bringing this up? It hurts because it has been unhealed. It has been unprocessed. So you have to bring it up because it keeps showing up. I like that. I think I'm coining that. You got to bring it up because it keeps showing up. You understand what I'm saying? It keeps showing up. And then every time it shows up, you have a flare up because it's another issue that we refuse as a collective to address. So, again, if you just joined us, what am I reading from? African Voices of the Atlantic Slave Trade by Nancy Bailey. Okay. Now, speaking of the shame, because I said shame, secrecy, and slavery, welcome to those who just joined us. She gives you the introduction of why she wants to do the book, X, Y, and Z. So I want to get to the shame because we're talking about how mainland continent Africans see. And by the way, I'm gonna put the video because there's a man from Ghana by the name of, his name just escaped me right out my head. Well, he did this interview with mainland continent Africans from different countries to say what their viewpoints are on African Americans. This is where the start of healing conversation comes, when you actually have the tolerance to hear what someone is saying, where this is coming from, who gave it to you, why do you believe this? Are you just believing hearsay and rumors and rhetoric? This is how we resolve things, not by suiting up and, just, oh yeah, gang affiliations, I'm rocking with this and I'm rocking with that, and not really willing to come to the table to hear the fullness of the matter. Okay. On one level, this is on page 11, chapter 1, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. On one level, there is a kind of shame. This is when she goes to Ghana and she's beginning to explore this conversation. On one level, there's a kind of shame associated with slavery that goes deeper than the Atlantic slave trade. I said this before, that there's a shame that certain people groups find this to be a shameful thing that they want to cover. And it says, and its operations. Domestic slavery, which existed before its Atlantic counterpart, this is facts, is a subject that most Ghanaians do not readily discuss. So even when the Ashanti tribe were enslaving other people and domestic slavery existed on the continent, it wasn't something that you said, hey, yeah, let's sit down and discuss how we're enslaving one another. It says it's not considered proper, so there's a veil over it, to discuss or divulge someone's slave origin, even if by now this origin has no practical or detrimental effect on the person's present life. So it's like finding out, oh, the person was a slave. It leaves a mark in their culture, in their society. So when you look at in the Caribbean narrative and the mainland continent narrative of America, the thought process is the same way the thought process is on the continent. From them to this, you were slaves. And so one of the insults that we hear come up is you were cotton pickers. That's their way of right. It is a degradation. That's their way of putting down the status, even though many people are like, well, wait, you were complicit with this. Why are you putting me down? You see what I'm saying? But I'll continue. A Ghanaian scholar, Kofi Awonu, points out in this review of Iwe oral literature, quote, one of the most fearsome insults centers around slavery, end quote. Like here, one of the most fearsome insults centers around what? Your mama jokes, right? When I was thinking about the majority of the curse words or the profane words in this society, it has something to do with being a woman and it has something to do with your mother. And this is what someone uses. They use it in all ways, even if it doesn't apply. This person is a MF. You acting like a such and such B. It's always centered around that if you are cursed as a female in this particular culture, that's the lowest insult that you can give to somebody. Yo, you acting like a B. Stop acting like a P. These are all things that are attributed to the feminine principle. In their culture, the lowest insult that you can give to somebody is that you were a slave. So I'll continue. Traditional griots such as Komi, Ekpe use their awareness of this shame in performance is what is called halo poetry. Halo is the performance of poetry that includes insults of a particular person or a group. So this is not necessarily to the people who came over here. This is a cultural thing, like your mama jokes, where you're performing this exchange of insults and degradation of one another in a way that you can see who has the most lyrics. We see that in battle rap. Who has the most lyrics? Who can diss each other in the most clever way? This is something they were doing on the continent. It's just that the subject matter and what allowed you to win was different. Halo poetry, look that up. It was often used as a means of diffusing real-life conflicts since it was an opportunity to insult or criticize an offending party without resorting to violence. Again, the closest thing that I could talk about is the battle rap that we see in the culture and diss records. Tell me I'm lying. Put the link in the box. This is why I say education is important, so we can understand what we're seeing and see whether or not it's personal or whether or not it's cultural. It's not making it right or wrong. This is what, I don't know if anybody has watched Nigerian movies or Ghanaian movies. They do this to each other. They see ways in which they can deface and degrade each other when they don't like what the person has said, or when they don't like what the person is doing, or don't like how the person is acting. You will see this type of behavior, even one to another. Like, you are the anus of a lion, or you are the lizard who, like, all of these proverbial insults that they use to hurl on one another. Not saying it's right or wrong, but this is cultural. And we're seeing this. This is one of the complaints that are being made. And I also showed yesterday from 30 Years a Slave from Lewis Hughes that this was also still being practiced in slavery, to deface and defame the person because of their estate or because of who they work for. See, when we begin to tease this out and when we begin to comb it out and unpack it, it doesn't necessarily look like what many of us are trying to make it look like, possibly. It was often used as a means of diffusing real-life conflicts, since it was an opportunity to insult or criticize an offending party without resulting to violence. In fact, until it was banned by the British colony authorities in the early 20th century, halo was considered a useful social practice, since it helped community members to express their grievances in a non-violent manner. But even in Halo, there was a certain taboo boundaries. To call someone a slave or his or her mother a slave was off limits, even within this kind of playful banter. What are we learning thus far? You see what I'm saying? It's the same type of behavior on both sides of the water. The term was thought to be particularly offensive because before the intensified pursuits of the Atlantic slave trade, domestic slaves were usually criminals or debtors sold into slavery, right? Domestic slavery played the role prisons serve in industrialized society. This stigma, because that's what it is, I'm going to have to just make my title really long: shame, secrecy, stigma, separation, all of that, right? It's a stigma. So when they are on the continent, even though some fought and even though some were complicit, right, there is now a stigma. So many are right by saying, I feel stigmatized by you. I feel rejected by you. I feel as though you feel that you're better than me. And the reality is, culturally, for many, there is a stigma that comes with having been a slave. And so the insult that is hurled is that you were a cotton picker, or you were a cane cutter, or you were subjugated essentially by another person. And that, in the eyes, because of being a slave, that subjugates the person, then that lowers the estate of the person in the eyes of the free man. Okay, I'm gonna jump over now. I'm not gonna read the whole thing, but I'm gonna jump to page 12. It says, though there are varying views on this subject, it is fair to say that one impact of the history of servitude, whether it was marginal or widespread, is that there is now a shame attached to slave heritage. Much of the shame seems to be associated with the domestic forms of slavery, with reference to specific individuals and specific communities. So even in some of the media that comes out of West Africa, if the man wants to marry the woman, and the woman wants to marry the man, and the family finds out that somewhere along the line, and I remember watching a movie like that, where this particular tribe of people were off limits to marry into the population because they were at one time slaves. And so they were like, yo, you can't marry them. They used to be slaves, right? And so that was a whole conversation that I found to be interesting, that this particular classism or subjugation, or re-injury of the issue that someone sustained, is actually still there on the continent today, right? It says much of this shame seems to be associated with the domestic forms of slavery, with reference to specific individuals and specific communities, right? Let me jump down. This shame regarding domestic slavery may very well have had an impact on the understanding and memorialization of Atlantic slavery. Even though the forms of slavery were by definition quite different, chattel slavery in the Americas meant servitude and perpetuity. Let me jump down. Those who just joined us, Thank you for joining us. This is getting beyond the hype. I know there's a lot of hype. There's been a lot of hype, but this is getting beyond the hype and trying to get to a level of understanding of what's actually happening. So I'm going to jump from there. I just wanted to show that a little bit to show how on record there is a cultural issue. I'll just read this little last part here. There is a cultural thing that continues to happen in all spaces surrounding the estate of someone or what they have. It's like calling somebody who's been to jail a prison bird. You know what I'm saying? Even after they have long left, but that's an insult when even they may be trying to get to a different estate in society, you still brand them with this prison bird type mentality. And so, you know, that's to say, know your place, right? It says, bringing this subject of slavery and the slave trade to light may have the effect of freeing us from this past, thus creating a kind of catharsis, if you will, which in its best sense moves us to positive action beyond recriminations and accusation. May this period, which as Barn Hess says, is forgotten like a bad dream, be remembered for the purpose of honoring those who did not survive it and addressing the problems and challenges faced by those who did. I mean, I couldn't sum it up better. This is the purpose of going here. It's to acknowledge and honor those who didn't survive and address the problems and challenges of those who did. It goes on, but I wanted to bring out that she's on the continent speaking to those on the ground, getting an understanding of, you know, some saying you didn't fight, some said you did fight. And again, like I said, this cultural narrative of shame that surrounds being enslaved. Now, to the I ain't an African part. To the I ain't an African part. Uh-oh, sorry. I'm going to see here if I can. I was sitting there remembering some scenes. So the first scene I'm going to give is from Kunta, when, remember, Kunta's on the ship with Fanta, and they formed kind of a trauma bond because they went through this very traumatic situation together. So is the case with Aminata and the young boy who was her captor. She asked, and that was very profound, she asked him in the Book of Negroes, she's like, are you my brother or my captor? Which was deep. But they also found a trauma bond because they're coming from a place where they met in this very traumatic situation of being enslaved, and he later on gets enslaved, and then they you know, cleave to one another because that's all that they have from where they came from. And so there are different ways that we the people and our ancestors dealt with this trauma. Some, it depends on your personality and your spirit. You're going to deal with it in different ways. There were some who decided to cleave on to the last remnants, like Kunta in the little pouch that he got from his father. I keep mentioning that because this is some of the visuals. Sometimes we're visual people, right? And so depending on how we process what we're looking at, we can kind of get an understanding of what I'm saying. But this is when he runs off. This is how his foot gets chopped off, right? So he runs off to go see her, and he tries to rekindle this thought of we are where we came from. So listen to what she says, which is so profound. I'm going to take my picture also. I can bring it up closer. Okay. So that I can bring it up closer and not distract you. But listen to what she says to him. Historical fiction. I don't understand that African talk no more. Say it plain in English so I understand what you're saying. So she has been through a lot, and now he's speaking to her. He's holding on, because remember, the narrative is that he teaches his daughter Kizzy Kambi Bilongo. He's teaching her the little remnants that he has so that he doesn't totally forget where he comes from. And he's expecting Fanta to have done the same, but Fanta's coping mechanism was to disassociate from everything that she's come from. So he's trying to speak to her, and she's like, yo, don't talk to me in that old African stuff. I done put that clean out my mind, right? So she wiped her memory of it. Let's go.
What you mean, say it? Plain English. I'll put all that African talk clean out of my head. Don't talk it. I don't even think it no more.
She doesn't think about it. She doesn't talk about it. That, you know, I'm not there anymore. As in Rome, do what the Romans do.
Maggie. It's the name they give me. It's what I go by, Maggie. What name they give you? Toby. Toby. It's a better name than some I heard about.
So right here, even in this scene, you may be picturing, what I'm picturing is one ADOS person, and I'm not trying to be funny, I'm just looking at the mentality. One ADOS person, and she wasn't even generations in slavery. She was the generation who was taken from freedom and brought into chains and put in slavery. So you have a Pan-Africanist in this scene, right? I might have to come back and make a case for the Pan-Africanist hugged up with the ADOS. Now, Maggie, who is Fanta, is ADOS. Look, this is where I am. This is all I have. I don't have any remembrance of that. Kunta is Pan-Africanist. Kunta is like, yo, what do you mean? What do you mean you forgot the words? What do you mean you forgot where you're coming from? How quickly do we forget? We're not from here, right? So this is what we can, if we can talk about these two ideologies, we see it actually happening here.
See how we think. See how we call each other. The white man don't leave us nothing.
All right, so Kunta, which in this case, in my theory, Kunta's the Pan-Africanist. He's upset. He's like, yo, we can't have anything. They have taken everything. And look, they've even taken, because he held on to the thought of Fanta for a very long time. Like, that's what kept him alive. Every time he had an opportunity, he tried to go check her, because that was the remnants of where he came from. She represented that. And to see that she lost that, there was a disconnect there. Right? And he actually lost his foot over that. But we're going to go to another scene, right? I use these things for historical markers. I know people are going to say that it was plagiarized and this, that, and the third, but there are historical markers and conversation starters that we can use when looking at this. So stand by. We're going to go to the next scene of, let me see what's the next scene. Fiddler. So Fiddler this is the relationship between the male and the female, right? Now, Fiddler would also represent a thought process of, and correct me if I'm wrong, this thought process is, this is all I have, you're all I have, and this is an ADOS type of mindset. And you could correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not trying to be funny, but if I'm understanding this mindset of, listen, this is all we have, and I have to work within this framework. So we're gonna listen to Fiddler now. I would also like to add, before I play this, that there has always been this antagonistic relationship between the two. One saying, what do you mean you're going to forget? And the other one resolving to their fate here in the Americas. So let's go.
Relax. You recall, you were the one who told me that he was the best one of the lot. You can recall that, don't you? I say that. You did. I don't really recollect saying. I'm saying that from now on, that blank is your responsibility. If he acts up in any way, I'll hold you responsible. You take my meeting, Philly.
Okay, the master says to Fiddler, Shalom, Deborah. The master says to Fiddler, from now on, he's your responsibility. So this question of, I don't understand why when Black people get in trouble, one seems to think that it reflects on all the Black people, because that's the culture that was created. That when one person did something wrong, the entire plantation got called out. The entire plantation was threatened with violence. So this thought that one singular person affects the whole is a residual of slavery. This is the reality. You hear what he says? You may not be doing it, Fiddler, but if you mess up, that means we mess up, and everybody's gonna get hit for you. This is the resentment and indifference that is coming from these places. But I'll play it, and I have to keep breaking it up so that, you know what I'm saying, they won't be like, ooh.
I guess the turn this here Guinea man into a proper field hand? Is that what you're talking about?
Proper field hand who speaks and understands the king's English and does exactly as he's told.
As a matter of fact, I'll give you 6 months until my birthday for you to accomplish that. Master Reynolds, I don't quite know how to thank you.
So now, again, Kunta is Pan-African and Fiddler is ADOS. And Fiddler is closer to the European who's oppressing him. And now it becomes his responsibility to break this wild Gilly man, to make him succumb to his fate. Are we understanding? This is the position that people have been placed in, and we're seeing it play out even today. But we'll continue. So now he's upset. He's going to have indifference towards his counterpart now.
Sure do I make my day happy, Master Reynolds. Yes, sir. Your pleasure for sure. As do as I say, Fiddler. All the thanks I expect from any of my niggas. I love you, Master Reynolds. Well, I'm glad you had 2 Campbells in. Give me a tank of the ale. You catch up with me.
Wait a minute. Okay, so Fiddler's really mad with Master Reynolds. Fiddler can't show that he's mad with Master Reynolds. Master Reynolds is really the problem. Fiddler is going to take his indifference out on Kunta. Okay. He tells Master Reynolds he loves him and then turns and shows disgust for those who look like him. This is why people be like, I don't understand black people where they're quick to tear one another down. This was also inbred within the mind.
As soon as that horse is shoot. Mother, you gonna leave me a paper saying that you give permission for old Fiddler to be out here with this here Guinea man? Because if any white folks come by and see us out here by themselves, they just liven up and take us for runaways. Oh, yes, they would. So it wouldn't take too much time shooting that horse if I were you. Yes.
You actually have to see the video. The minute that Master Reynolds rides off, Fiddler's disposition changed. This is the two-facedness that many experience. This double, I forgot what they call it. I think W.E. Du Bois wrote about it. But it's these the two faces that you have to have. So it gives you a level of a split personality. You're smiling and nodding and yes, massa. And then when you turn around, you become another person. So in this video, his face just totally changed as soon as Master Reynolds rode off. Okay.
Wouldn't take too long shoeing that horse if I were you. Wouldn't take too long. I'd right enough say I wouldn't take too long. You hear, Massa? Toby Guinea man? You hear him tell old Fiddler about making him into some righteous sort of field hand? Lord, you don't even know your name. First lesson. You Toby and I's Fiddler.
Okay, this is another observation that I've found in reading a lot of these narratives that I'm hearing. We welcomed you even during slavery. The person who was seasoned or quote unquote broken in did not always take kindly to the person who was straight from the continent. So this indifference between those who are mainland and coming from the continent, it was even then you were seen as a liability, not as an asset. Because now your behavior might affect the goodness that everyone else is quote goodness that everyone else is experiencing. So keep that also in mind.
And I'll rip your black hide if you don't do what I say. You don't know where you're going. You don't know about hoeing no tobacco. You don't know about no Mr. Ames with no whip. You don't know how to talk even. Get on up in there. No. You on a wagon. This is the wagon. You say wagon. You say wagon. Wagon. Good, Guinea man. Now, Master gives you a new name, too. Master say you name Toby. That's who you is, yeah? Toby. I's Fiddler. 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 Because I plays for the Christmas and the Jubilo. Sarah's Fiddler. That's me. And you say Toby. Kunta. Kunta Kinte.
This is again, I have to just keep going and stopping a little bit, keep going and stopping a little bit. But definitely we are seeing this conversation, but what we could imagine in today's time is ADOS and Pan-African conversation. Kunta is like, I am Kunta. This is who I am. And he's saying, Fiddler's saying, you don't know where you are. You don't know the dangers here. And I have resolved myself to this fate. And you keep coming with stuff that's going to get us in trouble. Okay. So, and then now that he's been made responsible because of his proximity to the master, he's really upset about, even threatening violence to him about his behavior. So let's continue.
Ah, no, that's your African name. Must have give you a new name. Must have said, you name Tobe. Hey, what's the matter with you? Cut me loose. Kunta Inte. You Africans all alike. Crazy. Must have said your name is Tobe. That's who you is.
Okay. And even with social programming, even if someone says that this is, I'm going to come on, that's not real, it's TV, it's historical fiction. You heard what he said? He says to him, you Africans, which is a clear separation, are all alike. So those who were here or prior became someone else. Okay, let's call them ADOS in this conversation. And the Pan-Africanist Kunta comes, and what he says to him, not welcome to America, let me show you around and let me show you how, because it's a dire situation. What he says to him is, you Africans are all alike, crazy. Now, who is Fiddler parroting? He's parroting the master. You see what I'm saying? So right now he had to take on the mind of the master because he's in survival mode. But how does that relate to his brother who ultimately comes from the same place he comes from? Okay, let's continue. And I'll come and question the comments.
He owns you. He can do anything he wants with you. There ain't nothing you can do about it. I've been scratching and scrambling most of my days to get where I got. Now I eats in the big house kitchen. I got pine boards on the floor of my cabin. And it don't take much coughing for the master to make me have a cup of corn whiskey for my medicine. Now that is fine living for a nigga, and I'll be damned if any African Guinea man is gonna make me lose all I've been working for. Now you take my meaning?
We saw a similar conversation recently with Steve Harvey and Monique. And Steve Harvey says to her, there's no integrity in this money game. So you're behind enemy lines, and some people want to be comfortable, and here you come rocking the boat. This is what he's saying to him. He's not going down for no Guinea man. So he saw himself totally separate from another person who just came here, who was victimized by the same thing that has you in your level of oppression. But there wasn't any sympathy for him. There wasn't necessarily any extension. There was resentment and indifference. Again, this is just display, so y'all won't say that I'm making stuff up, but let's continue.
He don't speak the King's English, Fiddler. Better learn. You told it. You best learn or you're going to get the bloody back for sure. And me too. Maybe. Yeah.
All right, so that was the end of that scene.
Your hair is
Hold on.
Shouldn't your conditioner be too? Well, there's a...
That's the end of that scene. So basically, that's the fear of repercussion. That's the fear of one person getting the other person in trouble. That is learned helplessness. Nothing we do is going to happen. You've seen so many people get beat. You've seen so many people get killed. You see so many people get sold. And that is what the institution of slavery and chattel slavery did. It interfered. It was so brutal and so vile because the objective was to drive fear and control the will of others through brute force and violence. And so on the other side of that, like I'm reading in Trauma Bonds, with us, we have to look at this domestic level of domestic violence and see how it tore apart one set of people as it bonded you to the oppressors, right? And so we see this split, like I said, illustrated here. But I have one more clip, and then I'm gonna be out of here after I read the comments. I got one more clip for y'all, and this is the famous scene. Here we go.
Think you're pretty?
Well, I expect she's pretty enough, but
You think she's pretty?
well, I expect she's pretty enough, but me, I like a different kind of face.
What kind?
Kind of face you got, girl. That man dig her face.
Mandinka? What food stuff that you talking about? That's African. I ain't no African.
Well, I'm Mandinka. We're proud people.
And I'm American. I was born here. My mammy and my daddy was born here. And my daddy's daddy. And I ain't no African.
Okay, stop. That sounds to me like the exact ADOS definition. So Bell in this particular story would have been what is considered ADOS. And even though Kunta is in America, he wouldn't be considered ADOS because Kunta is saying that you look like, and rightfully so, you may be here in America and enslaved, but your peoples come from the continent. And so because just like Fidela and Fanta, this discussion about what have I experienced has so far distanced me that I don't find it beneficial to be associated with that because it has no real-time value for where we are. And she was okay when he was like, yo, you beautiful, you pretty. She was all good with that. But the minute he said, you look like, you know, a Mandinka, she was in her feelings like, yo, I ain't no African. Let that sink in. I'm going to let it play. Hold up.
Bad time all around. Janelle for running off like that knows more sense than a mealy worm. Luther, too, old fool. Make Master mighty angry. Got no driver. Just a bad day. On top of all that, you call me an African.
I won't do it again, Belle. Never.
Toby. Toby.
All right. That's what I got for you guys right now. Those clips are available on YouTube. Again, she is mad, livid. So this is written in the story because there is some truth to this thought process, and that it did exist during that time. And it's worth looking into because you know the ancestors or the descendants of those type of mentality and mindset is still here today. Those who chose to never forget and those who chose to let go. And so you have this kind of internal war and striving, and that happened all throughout the diaspora where this situation has happened. Those who held on to remnants of the past and those who said we are a new people. So for it to be illustrated in this movie, as well as the book and in other narratives, it was a real and present conversation. There was another part in the movie where she says, don't be teaching her none of that African stuff. When she was teaching, I couldn't find that part. Maybe I should find that part. I think y'all got enough. I think I got the point. But he's teaching his daughter Kizzy. He does the whole ceremony of saying, behold, the only thing greater than yourself. These are the residuals of what he brought from his culture. He passed it on to his daughter. He tried to teach her these words. And it was scoffed at by his own wife, who he ends up marrying later. Like, don't be teaching her that African stuff. It has no value here. So when we talk about, again, like I said, to wrap it up, this is, I know, African shame, secrecy, and slavery, and many other things. When we talk about it, the conversation that we're experiencing in 2019, we have to be honest that these mindsets, there wasn't just, oh, come on over. I'm so glad you're here. I'm so glad you made it. That's not really what happened. You know what I'm saying? It was like, what are you doing here? Now you're going to mess it up for all of us. We already got a routine. Now we got to worry about you cutting up to get us in trouble. Some people held on to it, like I said, and some people just wanted it to go away quickly. With that said, I'll read some of the comments. One needs to represent and needs a whole name of the whole community of people that look like them. That's how people get programmed to play different roles. Yep. Consequences, old identity fights against the persistent override of a new identity because that's not his personality. Has cut himself off. Fiddler has cut himself off from the connection of his own people in order to survive. It was a survival mechanism under the whip of his master. It's a widespread case of artificial enforced grafting into a culture tree with barely nourished you. Correct. This is what's happening. We're looking at different mindsets. There was one time I came across one of in the research, I think it was The Underground, which came on a few years ago, where you see the people, you see the personalities, those who are able to lose their tail. That's what I wanted to say. But the conversation was, there's no right way to be a slave. Because everyone is in this oppressed situation, they are adapting based on their personalities and their spiritual aptitude to withstand the pressure. If some people feel that they cannot withstand the pressure, they're not going to buck the system. because they're not built like that. They're going to result to being that slave, that yes, a master type individual, because they wasn't built for that life. But that's just who they are. And then you have others who will say, I will never concede to that. I'm going out in a burning flame, right? And so even this thought process was used to demean one another. Amber Jackson, a lot of our people, hopefully Amber finishes her thought. There's a Aesop's fable that came to my mind the other day. I want to share this lastly. It's called, I think it's called The Fox Without a Tail. Right. This is because they used to put things in Proverbs, right? This is what we are experiencing with this whole, to my estimation, what we just heard in this quote Pan-Africanist thought or this quote ADOS thought, and it's an Aesop's fable, right? It's not long, so I will read it. The fox without a tail. A fox that had been caught in a trap succeeded at last after much painful tugging in getting away. But he had to leave his beautiful bushy tail behind him. We're going to break it down in a minute, y'all. For a long time, he kept away from the other foxes, for he knew well enough that they will all make fun of him and crack jokes and laugh behind his back. But it was hard for him to live alone, and at last he thought of a plan that would perhaps help him out of his trouble. He called a meeting of all the foxes, saying that he had something of great importance to tell the tribe. When they were all gathered together, the fox without a tail got up and made a long speech about those foxes who had come to harm because of their tails. This one had been caught by the hounds while his tail had become entangled in the hedge. That one had not been able to run fast enough because of the weight of his brush. Besides, it was well known, he said, that men hunt foxes simply for their tails, which they cut off as prizes of the hunt. With such proof of the danger and uselessness of having a tail, said Master Fox, we should advise every fox to cut it off, if he value life and safety. When he had finished talking, an old fox arose and said, smiling, Master Fox, kindly turn around for a moment, and you shall have your answer. When the poor fox without a tail turned around, there arose such a storm of jeers and hooting that he saw how useless it was to try any longer to persuade the foxes to part with their tails. And you know, Aesop's fables usually likes to have the moral. And it says, do not listen to the advice of him who seeks to lower you to his own level. That's deep. This is what came to my mind as I was thinking about the situation that we're experiencing. The fox without a tail. I used to read the narratives, you know, different proverbial to my children. And I'm like, we're experiencing just this. We saw it in the Roots, or we listened in the Roots story, as well as other places, that people are hurting because of their experience. And if they can convince you to let go of your experience or come into the same state as they are, then they can begin to feel better about themselves instead of processing that experience. This is why I keep talking about cleaning our vessel and beginning our own journey before it is we stand before people and try to convince them to cut their tails off. Amber says a lot of our people are programmed to poison our community, to cut off our progress, to know our culture and love each other, to connect to our higher power. Remember our culture and traditions to empower. That's what Amber Jackson wanted to say. Thank you for sharing. And this is what I'm talking about. The poison also is misinformation. The poison also is I'm hurting and I'm oozing and I'm giving it to you so you can bond to me in this way. Correct. We have to teach our children the truth. We have to learn the truth. Then we have to be willing to challenge our own narrative. Like if you are within the whatever drama control that you use to get your energy, right? And if that drama control is based on not seeing the narrative in its fullness and believing a certain story, any information that comes in that challenges that, we're going to be upset. Like, why are you bringing that up? Why are you talking about that? That doesn't have anything to do with it. Yes, it does. Because if we step back from the picture, we'll be like, okay. And for those who join in late, you're going to have to go back to the beginning where I read from African Voices to see that this type of doing the dozens, this type of looking down on each other because of your past experience is cultural. It doesn't make it right. It just makes it cultural. It's cultural. Ghanaians, West Africans, they do this to one another in their own spaces. So when you hear what you're thinking is only applied to you and that they're only doing to you and saying they're doing it because they hate us or they're doing it because they feel like they're better than us, then it behooves us to dig into, well, some people like, I ain't got no time for that. This is what I also encounter. I don't have any time for that. That's what people say. But if we don't have any time for that, then why are we talking about it if we're not trying to get an understanding about it? This, you know what I mean? So hopefully that was helpful. If you like the little breakdown, I try not to play too much, so people won't be like, oh, you know, you're playing copyrighted, but you can play for commentary. So that's why I kept stopping and commenting. Hopefully you were able to get something from that. I'll come back at another time and talk about some more things that can help, possibly in this discussion, to shine some light on things that need light shining on. And so let me know what you think about Fanta and Kunta possibly being this picture of ADOS and Pan-Africanism, as well as Fiddler being ADOS in this mindset, and Bell. And then we have this Kunta character who is still holding on to the past. With that said, everybody have a blessed afternoon. I'm about to go put this work in, y'all. I'll talk to you again later. Oopsie. All right, subscribe, share the video, like the thing, leave your comments, do all that nice, beautiful stuff. All right, one.